So today we're going to be talking about mending, and I think it's one of the most fundamental things that you learn when you start fly fishing. But I don't think that people really learn the most efficient way to mend. I don't think anybody teaches them why they're mending, the why, or when to mend, like which direction to mend, upriver, downriver. And I want to get away from the sense that mending is something that you do only when you're fishing an endo rig or a double nymph rig, because it applies a lot to dries, it can apply to streamers, and we'll go over all that today. So the first thing that you definitely have to get out of your mind is that mending isn't just to move the fly line above the strike indicator. It's not just to move the fly line downriver from the strike indicator. Mending is more of line manipulation. So when we talk about mending, we're going to talk about stack mending, we're going to talk about reach cast. All of this is manipulating your line on the water to counteract what the currents are doing to your flies that are under the water. So if you think about it, when you're fishing in the water, your bobber or your dry fly is going to be moving on top of the water, and it's going to be moving a lot faster than the water that's down near the bottom of the river. And what's happening is, because when the river's coming over, the river encounters an obstacle, like let's say a rock in this case, and it has to go around the rock, it has to go over the rock, sometimes it just gets pushed back upriver by the rock. All of these things, logs, rocks, sticks, all of these things that the current is encountering as the river's flowing downriver create friction, and the friction builds up to where the current at the bottom of the river is moving a lot slower than the current that's on the top of the river. So if you think about a piece of flotsam, a piece of foam, going across the surface of the water, you want your bobber, your strike indicator, to be going slower than that. You want it to be going actually slower than anything that's riding on the surface, natural insects or moss. And the reason is because your indicator is attached to your flies, which are probably down underneath the river near the bottom where the friction has built up the most. So your flies are going to be moving slower than your strike indicator. Even if it appears that you have a drag-free drift, you really don't, because the strike indicator is on near the surface and the flies are near the bottom. Flies are going slower, strike indicator is going faster. It's just the way that the dynamics of the river goes. So in mending or line manipulation, what we want to do is try to counteract that. Sometimes you mend downriver to speed your strike indicator up. Sometimes, and most of the time, you end up mending upriver so that your indicator can slow down. Because remember, the flies, the weight, everything that's underneath the surface that meets the friction of the bottom of the river is going to be traveling slower than the water that's at the surface. A good example of this is how you can fish in rapids or waterfalls when you come to a river, or during runoff. When the river is blown out, the river is pushing a lot of water. The fish, and you think, how the heck can the fish hold in that water? Well, they just hunker down on the bottom, and all of that stuff just passes right overhead. And we're near the bottom where the current has encountered friction throughout the entire process of the river. The current's not as fast, and the fish can just kind of hold to the bottom, hold to the edges out of the current, and they can still survive even when the current is moving super fast. So what that means for us is that you have to make your mends, you have to manipulate your line even better than you think you do, because one mend that moves most of your fly line but not your leader or your strike indicator isn't good enough. So what you want to do is, on your initial mend, you want to make that mend big enough that you move all the fly line and the leader that's between your strike indicator and your fly line. If you haven't moved the indicator on that first mend, and you haven't moved the leader that's between your fly line and your strike indicator, then you haven't mended. That isn't a mend. What's happening is you've mended. It appears like your fly line is upriver from your strike indicator, but all of the leader, your strike indicator, all of that stuff is still traveling down the river too fast compared to the flies that are on the bottom. So if you want a drag-free drift, don't be afraid to actually move your strike indicator on the mend, especially that first mend. Move your strike indicator back upriver, give your flies a chance to cut through the water table and sink to the bottom, and then start your drag-free drift. So you remember how I said we were going to learn how to mend more efficiently? And what I mean by that is, I think most people are taught to do the rainbow mend. You lift your rod tip up and then you move it sort of in a rainbow motion like this. And if you look at my arm and how much energy, how much motion it takes to do that kind of mend, you can see where it's not as efficient. Another thing it does is it just doesn't allow you to mend as hard. So what you want to do instead is you're going to pick the line off the water and then flick your rod straight up river at a lateral angle. Straight down, straight up, straight down, straight up. And look at, I'm manipulating this line, making them nice mends, and look at how much energy I have to expend. Compared to the rainbow mend where you're moving your arm, it's almost like a mini roll cast. Just want to lift that line up off the water and then give it a flick up river. Make a cast. The key is to lift the line up first and then make a mend up river. Give it a flick up river. You can tell I even turn my rod, or sorry, my reel up river so that when I flick it just goes straight up river. And that's a lot more efficient than doing that rainbow mend where you get your arm out there and you really try to work your body to make a good mend, and it ends up not being a good mend anyway. Make a cast, lift that line off the water, flick down river, flick up river. See, I can manipulate my line this way on top of the water. If I have a dry or a streamer, I can make it skate on top of the water. It's a lot more than just mending. It's learn how to manipulate your line on top of the water. Throw roll casts, you know. All of this should become second nature to you. So instead, you want that first mend to be aggressive enough to move your fly line, leader, strike indicator upriver. You don't want to make the mend so small that what you end up doing is having to do one mend. You get 3 seconds of drift, the flies are down in the water, you're in the money spot, and then all of a sudden you have to do another mend in the middle of your drift. And you've just given those fish a chance to know that the flies that you're using aren't real. So the next couple of times that you use them, they're not going to eat them. So if you mend good the first time, if you make a big mend, you don't have to do successive mends and move your flies, move your strike indicator. You should be able to get a good 10-foot drift without having to move the flies. All right, so we've spent the last however many minutes going over mending. A lot more complicated and a lot more thorough than you probably wanted to hear, but from now on we're going to do no rainbow mending, right? No half circle mending, no lazy mending. Do that lateral mend where you pick your rod tip up and then flick to the left, flick to the right, whichever way the river dictates that you need to mend. The next couple of videos we'll be going over are going to be over advanced mending techniques like the stack mend. So in order for those to get right, you need to be able to get this lateral mend, this cut mend a lot better than rainbow mend, because rainbow mends just aren't going to cut it.